A couple of weeks ago, I was browsing Amazon and I came across this. This is a $50, at the time at least, all-in-one liquid cooler from Cooler Master. It's the Elite Liquid 360. And at the time I was thinking, hey, this is like a top tier manufacturer that's coming out with a cooler that's priced actually lower than a lot of Thermalrights on the market. What could possibly go wrong? But let me tell you, after we got one of these things in and started testing it, well, it opened up like a whole can of worms because we found some major issues with this design, specifically on AMD systems. And what could have been an absolutely devastating review for Cooler Master sort of turned into like a little bit of a redemption arc. And that is the story that I wanted to talk about here. Because look, Intel temperatures, well, they were super competitive for an AIO that costs $50 on a pretty regular basis. But the AM5 numbers, well, they were just terrible, like a whole lot hotter than some of the worst coolers we've ever tested. It was even beaten by a cheap air cooler. So I did the thing that we typically do whenever we come across a massive problem with any product. We ordered a few more. So we ordered 2 more from Amazon Canada, and guess what? It was the exact same problem. So of course, at that point in time, we wanted to do a little bit more digging to see what was actually going on here. And what we found was a lack of mounting pressure on AM5. I mean, look at this side by side between Intel and AMD systems with the exact same amount of thermal compound. There's very little spread on the Ryzen CPU, while it almost hits full coverage on the Core Ultra. And our fix? Well, the intent was to increase pressure between the cooler's contact plate and the processor. So we 3D printed a few thin washers to fit between the retention brackets and the pump head fasteners. And the results from our sort of like back of napkin design 3D printed solution was like insane in our eyes, right? A 6-degree reduction in temperatures right across the board on all the processors that we tested on. Now, what the next step was a little bit more interesting, right? And I was really afraid that we were going to get flat out denial. We contacted Cooler Master and gave them a right to respond here. And instead of just poo-pooing the whole situation and saying, no, nothing happened, they said, look, give us a few days, we're going to go back and retest ourselves with the processors that you use and the settings you use. And guess what? They completely confirmed our findings. And not only that, they basically said, look, we're going to work on a solution right now that's going to be implemented for all of our customers in order to fix this situation. Basically, like us, their results came from adding washers, but their final solution is a bit thinner than ours since they needed to keep IHS pressure within AMD's specified limits. So their intent was to balance safety and temperature improvements. And after testing their sort of washer solution, that's these little guys that we have here, we've got actually a kit of them, we came to the same results as them. We saw a 5-degree average drop in temperatures. Of course, that's not as much as ours because theirs isn't putting quite as much pressure on the IHS as our 3D printed solution. But look, say if you have one of these coolers or you want to buy one because of like the insanely low price it goes down to on a normal basis, what are sort of like the next steps that you can do to get these kind of temperatures? Well, first of all, Cooler Master has decided to make a landing page where you can order a set of washers free of charge with proof of purchase. They're also taking it a step beyond that. It's their intent to ship a whole new bracket assembly. That solution, well, it's ultimately going to replace the washers, but anyone who initially claims the washer kit will also automatically get the new bracket when it's ready. And from a personal standpoint, I really have to appreciate the commitment that Cooler Master has both to communicating with us and also supporting the performance of what amounts to be like their base spec entry-level all-in-one liquid cooler series. But you know what else you should commit to? That's this case from Thermaltake.
You ever notice how a room never really sits still? Something's always changing, right? Like busy in the morning, the whole gaming thing by night, then it's just you and the quiet again. Appreciating your micro-TX decisions through all of it, while the TR200 just sits there, unbothered. Don't worry, it can handle it. It might look warm because of the wood. It runs cool though. That's kind of the whole idea. You leave the case alone until you want to build again, because not everything in the room has to move with the room. You can trust the case, and yep, that's the ad. The TR200 by Thermaltake, check it out below.
Anyways, the Cooler Master Elite Liquid 360 is what you would call sort of like a Swiss Army knife type AIO. It wants to be good at basically everything while also sticking to a very, very low price point. There's pretty good build quality overall, and there's a tubing length of 400 millimeters, which is one area we always see being cut on more affordable AIOs. But there are some corners that were actually cut, like pretty generic fans, pre-applied thermal compound, and cables that have not been pre-routed. But the biggest standout here has to be the pump head, because with the lighting off, it looks, well, sort of like a yogurt cup or a plastic egg carton situation. It just looks cheap. But turn on the lighting, and I guess how good or bad it looks is really up to you. What I can say though is that it's, I guess, unique. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the whole glowing tent effect, but that's for this one. That's the white version. And for once, I don't like the look of the white version of this cooler. On the other hand, the black edition looks so much better. I mean, look at this thing. With that tint on the pump head, it just looks more subtle, more stealth, both with and without the RGB on. But there is a little bit of a problem with that pump head. The second that you add a sort of like black screening effect in front of any lighting, you dull that lighting. And that means getting the pump head to match any other RGB within your case is virtually impossible. Anyways, besides the lighting, there isn't really anything to make this cooler stand out. It uses Cooler Master's proprietary entry-level dual chamber pump alongside a contact plate that doesn't seem to take into account any of the latest optimizations for AMD or Intel CPUs. That means it's pretty much flat and there's no offset whatsoever to compensate for the off-center heat patterns of modern processors. And speaking of that pump, when it comes to penny pinching, it's often one of the first things that's cut down. But Cooler Master, they didn't go that route. Not only is their pump variable speed, but it's also really, really quiet when running full out. Basically well below our noise floor and a lot quieter than all of the Asetek AIOs we've tested, other than the Noctua and the Antec Vortex View. But there was one little hiccup too, and maybe it's not a little hiccup if you tend to run your pump at variable speed mode, because look, when running full tilt, this thing is very, very quiet. But the second it hits either 1700 or 2100 RPM on that variable curve, it goes from being quiet to being like almost unbelievably loud. Have a listen to this. As for the fans on this thing, well, as I alluded to before, they're pretty much generic. They're basically fans that you would find on a lot of cases. They aren't specifically tuned for enhanced static pressure or airflow. It's not something that I would typically install on a radiator on an all-in-one liquid cooler. But that is beyond the point here. The problem with these is that because they're asked to work maybe beyond the regular static pressure cycle, they become almost unbearably loud. This is actually, believe it or not, the loudest all-in-one liquid cooler that we've ever tested with its fans running at 100%. I mean, you've got to listen to these things. Now, if we pause here for a second and zoom into the graph, a few things jump out right away. First of all, the fans are running at just 900 RPM when they broke through our noise floor of 32 decibels, with moderate noise increases between 1100 and 1200 RPM. And from there, noise rose like a freaking rocket ship until it peaked at just over 54 decibels. For comparison, let's overlay the Thermalright Frozen Edge onto this, and it's a lot quieter right across the entire noise range, with it only heading north of 32 decibels around 1200 RPM, 33% faster than the Elite. So from a noise normalized perspective, Cooler Master's budget AIO will have its fans running slower than the competition to achieve identical noise levels, and that will ultimately hurt its performance in our noise normalized testing. But one area where this cooler absolutely does not suffer is with its installation. I mean, yes, even with those additional washers that we've been discussing. First of all, the manual is super clear and straightforward. Also, Cooler Master has gone out of their way to make this thing as novice friendly as possible by pre-installing the fans and using a universal mounting kit that's compatible with every modern Intel and AMD socket. The only problem here is that the Elite can become a bit of a cabling mess. The fans are equipped with a custom header which combines RGB and PWM signals into a single cable. That does help things, but you'll need to build the entire cabling setup yourself with the individual cables and security locks that Cooler Master provides. I just wish that this was done at the factory rather than them expecting you to put it all together like a kit of Legos. Okay, so I guess that sets the stage for all of our in-depth testing, but I want to be clear. The vast majority of the results that you're going to see here are with what we call the new configuration, so with the washers installed. But I'm still going to be referring back to the results that we got in the initial configuration in a bunch of areas too. So right from the get-go, I want to call out the direct competitors that typically sit under $100 these days. There's the Prime LC360, Nautilus RS, and FX360 Pro around the $90 mark, and the Liquid Freezer 3 Pro, which you can find for as low as $70 if you're lucky. And of course, there's the Thermalright Frozen Edge series, which typically hovers between $50 and $60 US on a regular basis. So let's just go ahead and pop the Elite into here. And overall, for the price, if you can find it at $50, it really does give Thermalright a run for its money. As a matter of fact, because of their pretty strong track record on warranty and support, a lot of people would probably gravitate towards Cooler Master here. But you do have to remember, and it's going to be something I call back again and again here, the Elite needed an add-on kit to get these temperatures. And also, there's no way I'd recommend it at its normal $99 price point. There are far, far better coolers out there in that price category. And I have to bring this up again. Without those washers in place, Cooler Master's entry-level all-in-one liquid cooler is just simply a no-go for Ryzen 9000 series CPUs at any decibel level. But put them on and we're seeing an almost 6-degree lower temperature here. And remember, this is already on a pretty cool running processor too. Meanwhile, in gaming, the Elite lands a bit behind the Frozen Edge and Arctic liquid freezers across most of its decibel range, and in a statistical dead heat with those between 32 and 37 decibels. And that's good news if you can find this cooler for around that $50 US mark. But at its regular price of about $100, again, this is a devastating result, just like it was for Arctic. But we have to be honest, right? For the price, this cooler is competitive in a gaming scenario where CPU load is relatively light. Meanwhile, when the heat is turned up to like an 11 on a 9950X, the Elite Liquid 360 is again competitive down low between 32 and 34 decibels. But then it gradually starts falling behind in noise normalized tests because of how loud it gets relative to its fan speed. Still, the only AIOs that we've tested up to this point that can comfortably cool this chip tend to cost a hell of a lot more than the Cooler Master. And you can really see the impact of the Elite's overly loud fans as we narrow the results down to certain key decibel levels. At 32 decibels, it nearly matches the more expensive Atmos Stealth and Be Quiet Silent Loop 3. But then at 40 decibels, it's sitting at the back of the pack even after the washer kit is installed. This perfectly reflects what we found in our RPM to noise testing a little bit earlier in this video. As we switch over to the Intel side, it's pretty obvious where Cooler Master focused their testing and optimization. If you're running an Arrow Lake system and can find the Elite Liquid for between $50 and $70, it's actually the best price to performance 360mm all-in-one liquid cooler we've ever tested. Full stop. The Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 Pro is another pretty good option here, but that thing rarely hits $70, and the Elite manages to tie it at 32 and 33 decibels. The ironic thing here is the washers also made a small difference in the Intel results. They were good before the mod and even better after it. But again, we're seeing basically no difference between most of the coolers here, and that points towards the chip getting all the cooling it needs to run at optimal temperatures and clock speeds. So it doesn't matter if you pick an unbelievably expensive Tri-X Panorama or catch the Liquid Elite 360 on sale for $50. You'll get pretty comparable performance. The same thing goes for gaming. Other than the outliers like the Panorama and Noctua, every 360mm all-in-one liquid cooler we've tested falls into a very narrow 2.5 degree temperature delta. And that means most of the variability between them comes down to margin of error or minuscule run-to-run differences. So in a lot of ways, without some serious modifications to the way liquid coolers are designed and implemented these days, it really feels like we've reached a sort of cooling plateau on Intel's latest platform. And while it makes charts like these a little bit boring, I'd actually argue this is a good thing for buyers. So up to this point in time, we've established that there's at least one clear miss on this cooler, right? And that is the AMD mount. And there's another potential miss on it, and that is the fans that Cooler Master used. They're very, very loud. So what happens when we throw like $100 worth of Fantex T30s onto this thing to see if we can improve the temperatures even more? And I'll tell you what, the results here are pretty interesting, because on the 9800 X3D, the Elite went from a good budget option to a solid middle of the pack contender, because those T30s, they shaved off another 3 degrees. But on our 285K, those same T30s had very little to almost no effect. They didn't even lower temperatures by a single degree. And the 9950X saw what were essentially the same temperatures, even with that $100 worth of fans installed on the Elite. So what this shows is even with the washers and the T30s, there's a bottleneck somewhere in this loop that's limiting cooling on ultra high-end, high wattage AMD chips. So with all that being said, here's the good news, and I think you know where I'm going with this. You have to give Cooler Master some credit here, because they actively worked with us in order to institute a solution for their AMD users. They made this product so much better for people who have already bought it. But that doesn't mean that they're completely off the hook here, because the fact that this cooler was released in its current state, well, it's completely inexcusable, especially for a company as big and as respected as Cooler Master. And that's sort of the biggest problem, right? Because I could love these improvements. I could glaze Cooler Master for another 20 minutes in this video, but in the end, it does not matter. The numbers that we saw and the improvements that we saw come from a retrofitted solution. Basically, like, you're gonna have to wait for this thing to ship to you to get the best numbers on AMD. And until this solution is rolled out directly in the packages from the retailer, well, I cannot recommend this for AMD systems. The results are just terrible. You may as well just get an air cooler and not have all the other worries associated with an all-in-one liquid cooler. On the other hand, on an Intel system, the price performance ratio on this all-in-one liquid cooler is like through the roof. For $50 to $60, you absolutely can't go wrong with it, especially now that we've seen Cooler Master's commitment to support their products. But look, Cooler Master, I'm talking to you right here. Because of this situation, you did yourselves a solid, which is great, but we are going to be watching you like a hawk in the future. I never want this situation to happen again, because it's not only Cooler Master, it's other manufacturers who tend to pigeonhole themselves into optimizations for a single socket. And that is such a big mistake in such a competitive market. So we're going to have to see how that progresses in the future. And I'm going to be with you guys every step of the way. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a great day, guys.